With that being said, it's Thursday, folks. Let's jump right in the news with Senator Rand Paul completely just destroying Anthony Fauci with his own words. We got a video clip here of the destruction, folks. But Senator Rand Paul threatened Dr. Anthony Fauci during a testy hearing on Wednesday, making it abundantly clear that things would be different if Republicans were to gain control of Congress in the fast approaching midterm elections. Folks, I mean, the opening clip here and the destruction that Senator Rand Paul does on Anthony Fauci, it's some next level stuff. Let's go ahead and roll it.
But she's had the flu for 14 days. Should she get a flu shot?
Well, no. If she got the flu for 14 days, she's as protected as anybody can be, because the best vaccination is to get infected yourself.
And
so
if
she really has the flu, she definitely doesn't need a flu vaccine. If she really has the flu,
she should not get it again.
No, she doesn't need it, because it's the most potent vaccination is getting infected yourself.
This is an ongoing question, and we've had ever-evolving opinions from you, Dr. Fauci. Currently, antibody surveys show that 80% of children, approximately 80% of children, have had COVID, and yet there are no guidelines coming from you or anybody in the government to take into account their naturally acquired immunity. You seemed quite certain of yourself in 2004, but in 2022, there's a lot less certainty. One of the things that we also know after looking at this for 2 to 3 years is that the mortality from COVID is very similar, if not less, than influenza. So when we look at this, we wonder, why you seem to really embrace basic immunology back in 2004 and why you seem to reject it now.
Well, I don't reject basic immunology, Senator. And I have never denied that there is importance of the protection following infection. However, as we have said many times, and as has been validated by the authorization by the FDA through their committee and the recommendation by the CDC through their committee, that a vaccination following infection gives an added extra boost. And that film that you showed is really taken out of context. I believe that was when someone called in who had had a reaction to a vaccine and asked me through a telephone in the interview if they should get vaccinated again. So it was in the context of someone who had a reaction. And as a matter of fact, Reuters fact check looked at that and said, Fauci's 2004 comments do not contradict his pandemic stance.
Actually, words don't lie. If you look at the
we're going to continue, but words don't lie. Both can be true at the same time. He could be taking a phone call and the person could have had a reaction, and him specifying, hey, you don't need to get the vaccination. 1, because you already had the flu, and 2, don't get one because you're going to have an allergic reaction to it. Second of all, it could also be true the fact of saying, hey, you know what? Basically, you have immunity. You have the best type of immunity from having the virus. There's no need to go get the vaccination afterwards because you've already have a pent-up immunity for it, which goes against exactly what they were trying to sell us at the beginning in terms of the vaccine, the vaccination for COVID-19 was supposed to be that you would never get it, that you weren't going to spread it. There's no symptoms, nothing. And then later on, they changed it and morphed it and changed it into something of like, oh, well, you could still get it. You can still contract it. You can still spread it. It just decreases the symptoms. It decreases your likelihood of living. I have the vaccine. I think vaccines are important, but the information that was peddled and spread was absolutely false. And so he's trying to get out of a little sticky situation because he was just caught on film contradicting himself from a 2004 statement to a 2022 statement. So pretty interesting here. And you're going to see how he's a little dodgy on answering questions. The highest paid government employee that we've ever seen is going to have the highest paid pension that we've ever seen is now dodging people's questions.
Words behind me, we can go over them a little bit at a time. She doesn't need it because the most potent vaccination is getting infected yourself.
It is true. It is true, Senator. It is a very potent way to protect.
So when you're trying to tell us that kids need a third or a fourth vaccine, are you including the variability or the variable of previous infection in the studies? No, you're not. Because when you have approved vaccines in recent times, and the committees that have approved it for children don't report anything on hospitalization or death or transmission. They only report that if you give them the jab, they'll make antibodies. And you can give kids hundreds of jabs and they'll make antibodies every time, but that does not prove efficacy. So what you're doing is denying the very fundamental premise of immunology, that previous infection does provide some sort of immunity. It's not in any of your studies. Almost none of your studies from the CDC or from the government have the variable of whether or not you've been previously infected. So let's look at adults.
If that is true, you guys, that is crazy. So in other words, to kind of connect it to maybe something you and I have been dealing with for a while, is talking about the wage gap between men and women. And I promise there's a point to this, and connecting it to this is they'll take the average of wage earners, not using any variables, just taking averages, and they'll say that, women make 70 cents under the dollar compared to men or whatever. Before it used to be like 52 cents back in the day, and now they say it's 70 cents, whatever. They take the averages, but they leave out a lot of variables within that calculation that would change that data. Very similar to here is if this is true of leaving out vaccinations, or those that were just not vaccinations, those that were ultimately already immune because they had the virus and contracted it, that skews the data dramatically in a certain direction. And so if they're leaving that variable out, which is a very important variable, then that messes around with the data a lot. And I think that's what Rand Paul's saying here. If that is true, that is crazy.
I've had 3 infections. Should I get a 4th one? If you're going to measure whether I get a 4th one, you need a category that has a 4th one in it, and you need one that has nothing in it, no vaccine or the 4th vaccine. But you also need to know whether they've been infected. If you ignore whether they've been infected, you're ignoring a vaccine, basically. So you're ignoring a variable. So what you're giving us is you decry, and people decry vaccine hesitancy. It's coming from the gobbledygook that you give us. You're not paying attention to the science. The very basic science is that previous infection provides a level of immunity. If you ignore that in your studies, if you don't present that in your committees, you're not being truthful or honest with us.
Senator.
He's not wrong, you guys. Like I said, if they're not showing that in any studies, that is 100% not being truthful. I mean, it's the same way of saying men or women get paid less than men, right? It's untruthful because you're taking an average. You're not actually incorporating certain variables that are going to change that data. In the same way here, you have a massive variable that's being left out here that's skewing the data. What a misrepresentation of the information coming from Fauci.
If I might respond, I have never, ever denied fundamental immunology. In fact, I wrote the chapter in the textbook of medicine
Is it
on fundamental
any of the guidelines,
immunology.
any of the guidelines for vaccines?
Do
do any of the guidelines for vaccines from the government include previous infection as something to base your decision making on with vaccines? Do any of the guidelines involve previous infection? That's why you're ignoring previous infection, because it doesn't involve any of the guidelines. And furthermore, we've been asking you, and you refuse to answer, whether anybody on the vaccine committees gets royalties from the pharmaceutical companies. I asked you last time, and what was your response? We don't have to tell you.
Right.
We've demanded them through Freedom of Information Act, and what have you said? We're not going to tell you. But I tell you this, when we get in charge, we're going to change the rules, and you will have to divulge where you get your royalties from what companies, and if anybody on the committee has a conflict of interest, we're going to learn about it. I promise you that.
Mr. Chair, can I respond to that, please?
May.
Okay, there are 2 aspects for what you said. You keep saying you approve, you do this, you do that. The committees that give the approval are FDA through their advisory committee. The committees that recommend are CDC through their advisory.
All right, I don't know if you guys are catching how he's flipping the script here. One, he never acknowledged the fact that they were leaving a variable out. He never talked about that, which makes you wonder if Rand Paul is actually speaking truth here of them leaving out a massive variable within their studies and multiple studies. Second of all, notice that once Rand Paul says, hey, second, we start taking over in the midterms and we're going to change shit, and we're going to start really looking into this, and you, Anthony Fauci, look what he's doing here, spreading the blame. He's moving the pieces around going, oh, well, they said it. Hold on, I never said this. No, it was them that made the decisions. It was them that put this in place. You see what he's doing here, folks? He's trying to cover his own you-know-what right now because he knows what's coming this November.
Committee. And you keep saying, I'm the one that's approving a vaccine based on certain data. So I don't really understand, with all due respect, Senator.
You're the one that said you would not reveal. You would not reveal what companies gave you royalties or what company gave the other scientists royalties.
Gotta move
That's
on.
what you told the committee.
Senator Paul,
Sir,
you gotta move on.
Could I please answer that?
Briefly,
You
yes.
keep asking committees. They're not my committees. They're the VRPAC committee for the FDA and the ACIP for the CDC. So I don't have any idea what goes on
And they
with
won't
the...
reveal, as well as you won't reveal.
Okay,
what
we're
companies
gonna
you
move on. We're over time. Senator Paul, you're over. Everyone is over a little bit. I just want to make sure we keep on time here. For the record, I know Chair Murray.
So he's going to continue here. There's really nothing much after that. I don't know if you saw Anthony Fauci trying to grab something. Is Rand Paul previously asked him about his royalties, and he did give a certain description and a specific description of where royalties are going and how much it was. I think there's maybe information that he's not sharing within there. But we'll have to find out if things do change from Democrat to Republican in the midterms. You could really see a lot of investigations happening with Anthony Fauci and kind of the mishandling of the COVID-19 pandemic. So there you have Rand Paul versus Anthony Fauci. The charades continue. The theatrics continue. Can't wait to see what happens coming this midterm and thereafter between them two. I hope you enjoyed that clip from the Bald Brad Show. If you did, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all our future content.